Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter is more than just a series of books and films. It's a living universe full of magic, wonder, secrets, and unfortunately, strangeness. Today, we're diving into Hogwarts, the school of magic every fan once dreamed of attending. But instead of spellbinding lessons, we're embarking on an investigation into the school's rules, which seem, to put it mildly, quite strange. Are you ready to peek into the hidden corners of the wizarding school? Then let's begin. Number 1. What do the rules say about health and safety? If Hogwarts existed in the real world, it would be immediately shut down by any workplace safety authority. A three-headed dog on the 3rd floor, a homicidal willow tree, giant spiders lurking in the woods, all of this just steps away from children. Not to mention staircases that move of their own will, as if testing the student's balance. Where is even a hint of basic safety protocols in this school? Are teachers allowed to keep volatile potions, cursed artifacts, and dangerous creatures in their offices without restriction? And if there are no such rules, then who exactly is responsible for the safety of the students? Number 2. Do concepts like curriculum and student rights even exist? In our world, a school system like this would trigger lawsuits and protests in no time. Teachers at Hogwarts act like absolute monarchs. Umbridge tortures students with a magical quill. Snape openly bullies anyone not in his house. And every new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher brings a completely different style, from hands-on practice to dull theory lectures. Where is the ministry in all of this? Are there no standards? Does anyone even check what the children are being taught? And if the ministry can so casually appoint someone like Umbridge, does that mean student rights are simply irrelevant? Number 3. What's the deal with Filch and Mrs. Norris? Argus Filch. Forever grumpy, forever suspicious, and somehow always one step behind the rule breakers, as if drawn to them. But it's not him doing the finding. It's his cat, Mrs. Norris. She appears in the most inconvenient places at the worst possible times, and right behind her, there's Filch, as if summoned telepathically. But wait, Mrs. Norris is supposed to be an ordinary cat, not a magical creature. That's what Rowling says, so how do we explain her unnerving surveillance abilities? Could she be something more than she appears? Or has Filch discovered a forgotten way of communicating with animals? Number 4. When did the dungeon punishments end? In the first book and film, Filch darkly reminisces about the days when students were hung by their ankles in the dungeons. Sounds like something out of the medieval Inquisition, doesn't it? But when exactly was this practiced? The 14th century? Or just a few decades ago? If such punishments occurred in the recent past, why didn't parents revolt? Hogwarts is dangerous enough as it is. Imagine sending your child to a school where they could be hung upside down for minor misbehavior. Why does only Filch bring this up? Why does no one else mention that such methods have been outlawed? Number 5. Why do the secret passages still exist? Hogwarts Castle is famous for its secrets. Hidden doors, secret tunnels, passageways that lead outside the grounds. It's all very romantic, neat, and incredibly unsafe. Here's the problem. If even kids like the Marauders or the Weasley twins know about them, why haven't the teachers sealed them off? Sirius Black, a highly dangerous fugitive, managed to sneak into the castle using these very paths. Hogwarts isn't just escapable, it's infiltratable. Have none of the professors in all these centuries thought to close them or add enchantments? Number 6. Why isn't nighttime wandering properly monitored? Hogwarts is an enormous castle with hundreds of staircases, corridors and chambers, and at night it's patrolled by Filch and maybe a few teachers. That's it? Why has no one ever created an official version of the Marauders map to track student movements? Yes, it might be an invasion of privacy, but if a student wanders into danger or the Forbidden Forest in the middle of the night, who will be held responsible? How is it that a few teenage boys invented this magical map, but Dumbledore never implemented something similar for actual safety? 7. Why isn't there strict control over the use of magic outside lessons? Fred and George Weasley turned the school corridors into a testing ground, skiving snack boxes, wildfire whiz-bangs, portable swamps. They broke magical rules daily. And yet, aside from occasional glares or half-hearted scolding, they thrived. Even Professor Flitwick once chuckled at their charm. In Order of the Phoenix, after their legendary fireworks rebellion, McGonagall simply said, "It was a very fine bit of magic." No punishment, no consequences, just admiration. The rule about no magic outside class, it vanished with a bang and a few dragon-shaped firecrackers. But it wasn't just the twins. Draco Malfoy used hexes in hallways. Seamus Finnegan's spells exploded mid-practice. Even first years like Hermione used spells outside class without hesitation. In Philosopher's Stone, she repaired Harry's glasses with Oculus Reparo on the train, before school even began. No one stopped her. No one explained the boundary. The rules existed in writing, but not in action. At Hogwarts, magic was everywhere. Which raises the real question: why make rules no one intends to follow? 8. Why do students communicate with their parents so rarely? Ron wrote to his parents a few times a year, mostly about how Fred and George had blown something up, or how Snape was being unfair again. But we never see Molly Weasley visit Hogwarts, not once in 7 years. No parent-teacher meetings, no visiting days, just owls fluttering in with letters and howlers. "Ronald Weasley, how dare you steal that car?" Even that iconic moment came from a bird, not a visit. When Hermione was attacked by the basilisk, she lay in the hospital wing for weeks. Her parents, both Muggles, were never mentioned. No sign they were called. No one spoke of them being notified. In the Muggle world, that would be negligence. In Hogwarts, it's tradition. Parents don't visit. They don't check in. They trust the school completely. Or maybe they're not given much of a choice. The train leaves from Platform 9, 3-4, and doesn't stop until June. Hogwarts wraps itself around its students like a fortress, and like any fortress, it keeps things out, including family. The more the students stay inside, the more the world outside fades. Maybe that's the point. Full immersion, total isolation, no distractions, but it comes at a cost. When home becomes a memory and magic replaces love, what happens to a child who just needs a hug from mum? 9. How exactly is the danger level determined for cancelling classes? A basilisk was loose in the castle. Students were being petrified, frozen in place, eyes wide with horror. One nearly died, and yet classes continued. In Chamber of Secrets, even after Hermione was attacked, the response wasn't to evacuate, it was to cancel Quidditch. "All students are to return to their common rooms," McGonagall announced. "Quidditch is cancelled." That was the line. A monster in the walls, still manageable, but flying brooms, too risky. When Dementors swarmed the grounds in Prisoner of Azkaban, students fainted. Harry collapsed on the Hogwarts Express before even arriving. Lupin explained, "Dementors affect you worse than the others." But no one questioned why soul-sucking creatures were stationed near children. Dumbledore himself said, "They are not to enter the school." And yet they did. Again and again. Even during a Quidditch match, one flew directly onto the field. The solution? Not to remove the Dementors, just to teach students how to fight them. Sirius Black broke into the Gryffindor Tower, twice, in the dead of night. He slashed a portrait and stood over Ron's bed with a knife. Still no closure, no pause, just more passwords, more lectures, and business as usual. What would it take to cancel school for a day? A dragon in the Great Hall? Voldemort in the staff room? At Hogwarts, danger isn't disruption, it's tradition. 10. Why is the house points system so unfair? In Philosopher's Stone, Slytherin was set to win the House Cup. The banners were green, the hall decorated, and the students already cheering. Then Dumbledore stood. "I have a few last-minute points to award," he said. Neville got 10, Ron 50, Hermione 50, Harry 60. And just like that, Gryffindor won. No explanation, no oversight, just applause. To the Slytherins, it was a public humiliation. To everyone else, it was justice, because the heroes had to win. Severus Snape made his bias a daily ritual. He took points from Gryffindor for breathing too loudly. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he caught Harry with the Marauder's map and called him arrogant, then tried to expel him. When he couldn't, he removed points. "You have a habit of being where you ought not to be, Potter," he sneered. No one questioned it. No one stopped him. Meanwhile, Draco Malfoy hexed students in the hallway with impunity. There was no transparency, no rules. No one explained how many points an action was worth or who decided. It wasn't a system, it was a stage, a way to reward favourites and punish rivals. And in a place already split into houses, it fed resentment, not loyalty, not pride, just a quiet, growing sense that the game was rigged and some banners were always meant to fall. 11. Why do underage wizards have access to dangerous magical items? The Monster Book of Monsters had to be tied shut with a belt. That's not a metaphor. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Hagrid gave it to third years as a required textbook. It growled, it bit, it tore through furniture. "Stroke the spine," he said, casually, as if this violent creature disguised as literature was just another school supply, and yet no protective glove, no safety briefing, no spell to contain it. Just good luck, and mind your fingers. In potions class, students handled flobberworm mucus, doxy venom, and even powdered bicorn horn, an ingredient used in Polyjuice potion, one of the most complex and dangerous brews in the magical world. First years were trusted with boiling cauldrons and sharp knives surrounded by flammable and explosive ingredients, and in the hands of someone like Seamus Finnegan, that setup practically begged for an accident. But Hogwarts never seemed concerned. They taught brewing like it was baking. And then there were the wands. Every 11-year-old walked into Hogwarts carrying a weapon capable of doing real harm. No training period, no restriction charms, just a first spell and off you go. Even Draco Malfoy used his wand to disarm, trip, and hex other students in the corridors without facing real consequences. In Chamber of Secrets, when Harry accidentally speaks Parseltongue during a dueling club match, chaos breaks out, not because of the spell, but because of the language. No one even mentions that children are flinging curses at each other with almost no control. Where is the line? At what point does trust become negligence? Hogwarts seems to believe that danger is just part of education, but there's a difference between challenge and carelessness. When a book can break your nose, a potion can melt your skin, and a classmate can hex your tongue away, maybe it's time to ask why safety is more of an afterthought than a priority. 12. Why doesn't Hogwarts provide psychological support? Harry watched Cedric die. He faced Voldemort in a graveyard. He heard the words, "Kill the spare." And still, the next morning, he was expected to sit through breakfast in the Great Hall like nothing had happened. No counselor, no one pulling him aside, not even Dumbledore, who simply offered silence and a heavy stare. Trauma was part of the lesson plan. Pain was something students were expected to survive, but survival isn't healing. Neville Longbottom lived with the knowledge that his parents were tortured into madness. Bellatrix Lestrange's laughter haunted his dreams, even before she escaped Azkaban. At school, Neville was mocked, belittled, even by his own professors. Snape, standing before the class, once said coldly, "Why is it always you, Longbottom?" No teacher ever stopped to ask why Neville struggled. No one asked how he felt. They only expected him to do better, to just cope. Draco Malfoy was raised under a pure-blood ideology, a family legacy soaked in fear and control. In Half-Blood Prince, he cried alone in the bathroom, wand shaking in his hand, as the weight of his father's prison sentence and Voldemort's expectations crushed him. He told Myrtle, "I have to do this. He'll kill me if I don't." But even then, even in his clear spiral, Hogwarts offered him nothing, just detentions, suspicion, and silence. The wizarding world seems to treat emotional pain like a test of character. If you're strong, you get through it. If not, too bad. But what if someone had sat Harry down after the graveyard? What if Neville had been told he wasn't weak, just hurting? What if Draco had heard, for once, that he could make his own choices and that fear didn't define him? Hogwarts teaches transfiguration and charms, but never how to carry grief. In a castle filled with magic, it's the one kind of healing that's never taught. 13. Why do first years travel to the castle by boat while others use carriages? On their first night at Hogwarts, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the other newcomers were led by Hagrid to small boats waiting by the lake's edge. "No more than 4 to a boat," Hagrid shouted, his lantern swinging. As the boats glided silently across the black water and the towering castle came into view, it felt like magic, real, overwhelming magic. That moment when the castle first appears reflected in the still surface of the lake is seared into Harry's memory. But what's curious is that this magical journey only happens once. Every year after, students arrive, not by boat, but in carriages pulled by creatures most of them can't even see. The carriages are drawn by thestrals, skeletal, winged horses, visible only to those who have seen death. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry sees them for the first time after witnessing Cedric Diggory's murder. "They're called thestrals," Luna Lovegood tells him, in her usual distant voice. For Harry, it's a shock. The creatures were always there, hidden in plain sight, invisible to the uninitiated. What must it be like for a fourth year who now sees thestrals for the first time? To climb into a carriage pulled by death itself while first years float peacefully across the lake, still innocent? The divide is more than logistical, it's emotional. First years arrive in wonder. Older students return with scars, many unseen. What seemed like a charming tradition becomes unsettling when seen from the other side. The choice to separate the first journey from the rest may be intentional, a soft entry before the darkness, but Hogwarts never explains it. Not to the students, not to the reader. The moment simply passes like the boats on the lake. And what of Neville Longbottom? He saw his grandfather die, yet he didn't see thestrals until later. The logic feels inconsistent. Is the boat ride truly about ceremony, or is it just oversight? Could Hogwarts not give students the option to choose how they arrive, to reflect perhaps on what they've lived through? For Harry, watching the boats from the thestral-drawn carriage meant seeing both past and future, the end of one innocence and the beginning of another kind. 14. Why is there no school uniform for cold weather at Hogwarts? The snow had just begun to fall when Harry Potter stepped out of the Gryffindor common room during his 3rd year, ready for another trip to Hogsmeade. The chill was biting, the kind of cold that reached under robes and gnawed at the bones. He tugged his Gryffindor scarf higher up his neck, but the long, thin material was more for show than warmth. Ron Weasley beside him stomped his feet and rubbed his hands together. They wore their standard school robes, a few layers underneath, and scarves in house colours. But there was nothing that resembled a winter uniform, no enchanted cloaks, no thick wool coats, not even gloves. Hogwarts, a 1,000-year-old castle surrounded by the wilds of Scotland, had no official uniform for winter, and no one ever seemed to question it. Winter was a frequent season in the Harry Potter books. Snow fell often, and it was always cold enough to freeze the Black Lake. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, snow lay thick on the grounds and icicles hung from the rooftops, yet students trudged to class as usual. When the trio visited Hagrid's hut or headed down to Hogsmeade, there was no mention of anyone wearing anything warmer than their robes and scarves. The absence of proper winter clothing in these moments was jarring when one thought about it. Even Muggle schools have dress codes that adapt to the seasons. Why doesn't Hogwarts? The castle itself was described multiple times as draughty and cold. In the Order of the Phoenix, the 5th-floor corridor near the Prefect's bathroom was as cold as the rest of the castle, and even with fires roaring in the common rooms, the chill lingered in the corridors. Harry was often seen warming his hands by the Gryffindor fireplace, and the students spoke about the icy winds in the hallways. Ron, in The Half-Blood Prince, even remarked bitterly about freezing corridors during one winter term. Despite all this, there was no mention of gloves being passed out by staff or coats being issued by Madam Hooch before flying lessons in January. There was magic, of course. Magic was the excuse for everything. Perhaps spells like Impervious were meant to be enough. Yet that same spell was only mentioned being used on Harry's glasses, not on clothing. If there was a charm for warmth, surely it would have been widely taught, especially for first years unfamiliar with long Scottish winters. But that lesson never came. Professor Flitwick didn't teach a warmth charm in any of the defense or charms classes we hear about. And during moments like the snowy trek to the greenhouses in the Chamber of Secrets, students are simply said to hurry through the snow, without any suggestion that magic was keeping them warm. The text is silent, and that silence feels cold. Neville Longbottom, clumsy and forgetful, would have surely been the first to suffer in this environment. One can easily picture him shivering at the edge of the lake, clutching a broken quill with numb fingers during an outdoor care of magical creatures lesson. And what about Luna Lovegood with her light shoes and dreamy expression? There's no reason to think she owned charmed thermal gear. The wizarding world was full of inventive magical objects, self-stirring cauldrons, clocks that told your location, quills that wrote for you. But no one thought to create winter boots that heated themselves. It's a baffling gap in magical practicality. Even Hermione Granger, known for preparing thoroughly, never seemed to conjure warming charms. She prepared for exams, for basilisks, for time travel. But not for winter? It seems deeply inconsistent with her nature. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, the trio walks through ankle-deep snow to visit Hagrid's hut. The cold is vividly described, their cheeks red, their breath visible. And still no special gear, no coats, no magically heated mittens, just house scarves flapping in the wind. How is it that the most brilliant witch of her age never even suggested a better uniform or warming enchantment? Was it oversight by the students or by the school? One might argue that Dumbledore, in his eccentric wisdom, believed enduring the cold was part of a Hogwarts education. Character building, some might say, but that theory crumbles under scrutiny. Dumbledore was compassionate, whimsical, and often protective. He gave Harry his father's cloak to sneak around unseen, allowed students to rest in the hospital wing for minor ailments, and ensured that feasts were magical and comforting. Why then would he let his students freeze during blizzards just to toughen them up? It doesn't align with his character, nor does it reflect well on McGonagall, a stern but fair leader who cared deeply for her Gryffindors. Then there's the case of Quidditch matches, often held in the dead of winter. In the Philosopher's Stone, Harry's first game is played in November. In the Order of the Phoenix, Ron's disastrous game takes place amid howling wind and sleet. Players were given protective gear, helmets, pads, brooms, but not winter gear. The only mention of warmth was the Gryffindor supporters wearing scarlet and gold scarves. Even Madam Hooch, responsible for student safety, didn't insist on thermal robes or warming charms. There were no magical tents like those used at the Quidditch World Cup. The students were expected to endure, as if cold were an optional discomfort. 15. Why isn't self-defense or ethics of magic taught from the first year? In the grand stone halls of Hogwarts, where portraits whisper and staircases move at will, children as young as 11 are handed tools capable of altering reality. With trembling fingers and wide eyes, they clutch wands imbued with ancient power, bottles of volatile potions, and books that contain knowledge far older than the castle itself. Yet as they step into the magical world, dazzled by moving staircases and floating candles, no one sits them down to explain the consequences of that power. They are taught how to cast spells, but not when to cast them. They learn the mechanics of potion brewing, but not the ethics of using a love potion on someone against their will. They are told the unforgivable curses are illegal, but no one explores why, at least not until it's already too late. In their first year, students like Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley dive into lessons that focus on execution. Charms with Professor Flitwick teach them how to make objects float. Potions with Snape teach them to brew elixirs that can poison or heal. Even Transfiguration with McGonagall offers a potent glimpse of transformation magic. But amid all the practical instruction, no professor ever pauses to ask, should this magic be used at all in certain circumstances? Is it ever ethical to levitate someone without their consent? Is a truth serum moral if it bypasses a person's autonomy? The questions go unasked, and the silence becomes dangerous. The lack of early ethical education becomes even more glaring when students face real danger. In Harry's first year, he encounters a troll in the dungeon, a possessed professor, and a deadly enchantment meant to protect the Philosopher's Stone. Not once has he been given the tools to handle these crises through knowledge of magical self-defense or moral reasoning. It is only instinct, courage, and luck that help him survive. Hermione, for all her brilliance, learned how to petrify someone before learning whether it was morally justified. In a school where portraits are sentient and centaurs debate prophecy with philosophical depth, why isn't there a class on magical ethics from day one? By third year, Remus Lupin introduces defense against the dark arts in a new light. For the first time, students practice real defense spells, Ridiculous, the Patronus, protections against boggarts and dementors. It is practical, useful, and more empowering than anything they have learned thus far. Lupin even encourages them to think, to feel, to be emotionally grounded, but this comes 2 years too late. By that point, Harry has already dueled Draco, faced Voldemort, and flown illegally on a broomstick across the Hogwarts grounds. The world is not waiting for these students to mature before throwing threats at them, so why is the school waiting to prepare them? It is not only about defense. Magic in the wizarding world is intrinsically tied to emotion and will. A student casting a hex while angry may produce a far more dangerous effect than they realize. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry's fury causes him to shatter Dumbledore's possessions and send explosive magical bursts through the room, an example of raw, uncontrolled emotional magic. And yet Hogwarts has no subject that teaches emotional regulation. There are no courses in mindfulness, moral reasoning, or consequences of misused spells. A wizard child can cause immense harm simply by being upset, and there is no institutional effort to address this. Consider Neville Longbottom, a child often ridiculed and dismissed. Early on, he struggles with spell work, suffers from anxiety, and lives in the shadow of his family's expectations. In Philosopher's Stone, he tries to stop Harry, Ron, and Hermione from sneaking out at night. He knows it's wrong, but lacks the force of authority. He's silenced by a Petrificus Totalis curse cast by Hermione. This moment, while portrayed with humor, is ethically troubling. A student used magic to immobilize another simply for following the rules. No one reprimands her for this. No one reflects on the morality of silencing dissent with magic. The act is brushed aside, yet it establishes a precedent. Magic is a tool for convenience and control, not something to be wielded with deep care. One might argue that magical families teach their children these values at home. But Harry is a Muggle-born, as are many others. He arrives at Hogwarts with no understanding of the magical world, no grasp of its laws, customs, or dangers. Shouldn't the school therefore be the place where those foundations are built? Instead, Harry is thrown into a system that assumes he already understands the weight of magic. He doesn't, and no one teaches him. The implications of this oversight are not abstract, they are dangerously real. Tom Riddle, the boy who became Voldemort, was once a student at Hogwarts. He discovered dark magic in the restricted section, experimented with Horcruxes, and manipulated his peers. Had there been guidance in his formative years, classes that explained the human soul, the sanctity of life, the moral consequences of splitting oneself for power, perhaps a different path might have opened. Instead, the school gave him tools and never asked what he intended to build. Even Snape, as a young student, developed a fascination with the dark arts. His Sectum Sempra spell, found by Harry in the Half-Blood Prince's annotated potions book, is a clear example of magic without ethical boundaries. The spell slices and maims, yet Snape recorded it without warnings. Harry, in his 6th year, casts it on Draco without understanding its lethality. Draco bleeds out on the floor and only Snape's intervention saves him. This wouldn't have happened if Hogwarts had established a subject in 1st year that taught students the ethics of spell creation and usage. 16. Why are students required to live in the castle all year round? In the vast corridors of Hogwarts Castle, behind moving staircases and whispering portraits, lies a question far more unsettling than any riddle posed by the Sphinx guarding the Triwizard Maze. It's not about magical creatures or cursed artifacts, it's about policy. Why, in a world overflowing with magical means of transportation, are Hogwarts students required to stay in the castle for nearly the entire school year? From the 1st of September until the end of June, young witches and wizards remain confined to the ancient stone fortress, regardless of personal grief, emotional crises, or the simple human need for home. The magical world is by no means short of options. There is the Floo network, which allows one to travel by fireplace in a swirl of green flame. Portkeys can transport someone instantly across miles. Even broomsticks, as rudimentary as they may seem compared to other means, allow fast travel. And after students reach 17, they can legally apparate. Yet Hogwarts students are, for all intents and purposes, sealed away. With the exception of the brief Christmas and Easter holidays, and the incredibly rare sanctioned trip to Hogsmeade, they are barred from leaving the grounds. This practice seems draconian, not only in its restrictiveness but in its emotional toll on young people who may already be navigating the turbulence of adolescence, magical identity, and the pressures of a demanding curriculum. Take the case of Harry Potter himself. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry endures the trauma of seeing Cedric Diggory die and witnessing Lord Voldemort's return. Following this, he is forced to return to the Dursleys for the summer, where he is completely cut off from the magical world. But even when he returns to Hogwarts, the healing he desperately needs does not come from therapy, family, or rest. Instead, it comes from being thrown back into the dangerous chaos of school politics, prophecy, and surveillance from the ministry. Wouldn't a system that allows for all weekend or monthly home visits have provided him the crucial grounding he needed? Then there is Neville Longbottom, whose parents were tortured into insanity. In Goblet of Fire, when Barty Crouch Jr. uses the Cruciatus Curse in front of Neville during a Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, the moment is shattering. Neville gave a little moan. His face was pale as parchment. That day, Professor Moody, or rather Crouch in disguise, seems to understand the cruelty of it. But even then there's no follow-up, no allowance for Neville to return home, to be with his grandmother, or to process that trauma in a safe space. Hogwarts simply demands that he continue attending meals, taking exams, and sitting through lectures as if nothing happened. One might argue that safety is the reason behind such restrictions. After all, the world outside Hogwarts is often depicted as dangerous, especially during Voldemort's rise. But ironically, Hogwarts has never been truly safe. From a troll in the dungeon during Harry's 1st year, to the Chamber of Secrets being opened in his 2nd, to Dementors patrolling the grounds in his 3rd, and even a full-scale invasion by Death Eaters in his 6th, the castle is anything but a sanctuary. The idea that children are safer staying inside those ancient walls than visiting their own families, especially with magical escorts and protections, feels deeply flawed. Moreover, the level of emotional isolation enforced by this policy is rarely addressed in the books but is constantly felt. Communication is reduced to owls, creatures who, though charming, can hardly provide the instant support of a warm conversation or a comforting embrace. Students cannot call home, they cannot video chat or even use magical mirrors unless they're lucky enough to know of such rare enchanted items like Sirius's two-way mirror, which Harry never used until it was too late. When students like Ron or Hermione suffer, they must bottle it up or rely on their peers. There is no counsellor's office, there are no parent-teacher meetings, there is just the castle. Even Dumbledore, wise and enigmatic as he is, never advocates for a flexible system. In The Half-Blood Prince, after Katie Bell is cursed and nearly dies, her parents are not immediately contacted. Katie is taken to St. Mungo's, yes, but the delay in informing her family implies a deeper institutional rigidity. If a child is nearly killed by a dark artifact, one would expect the school to allow for immediate family access or even the student's removal from such a dangerous environment. But the wheels of Hogwarts turn slowly, guided by outdated tradition more than student welfare. One might wonder if the true reason lies deeper within the philosophy of the school itself. Hogwarts, with its house divisions and emphasis on loyalty to one's own group, creates a sense of belonging that may, paradoxically, depend on separating children from their original families. By making the castle their entire world for most of the year, the institution fosters a powerful psychological allegiance. There's no place like Hogwarts, students often say, but how much of that is affection and how much is emotional conditioning? Sirius Black once told Harry, "You're not a bad person, you're a very good person who bad things have happened to." That moment, shared in the Order of the Phoenix, was powerful not because it happened at school, but because Sirius was the closest thing Harry had to a father figure. Yet such moments of adult emotional support are rare and irregular. Hogwarts has professors like McGonagall and Lupin who care, certainly, but their roles are defined and their accessibility limited. There is no system in place for grieving students, no days off for emotional healing. The expectation is clear, no matter what happens, return to class the next morning. At 17, why do prefects have no real authority but full responsibility? The badge gleams proudly on Percy Weasley's chest. He polishes it often, wears it like armor, holds his chin high as he walks through the corridors of Hogwarts. As a prefect, Percy sees himself as a guardian of rules, a moral compass for Gryffindor. Yet beneath his officious tone and rigid posture, there is an inconvenient truth he cannot admit even to himself. The badge gives him very little actual power, and still it lays upon his shoulders the full weight of responsibility. This contradiction is neither unique to Percy nor accidental. It is woven into the very fabric of Hogwarts. Every year, 5 boys and 5 girls from each house, typically 5th years, are chosen as prefects, along with 1 head boy and 1 head girl. On paper, it is a position of honor, a recognition of maturity, diligence, and trustworthiness. Prefects are meant to guide younger students, keep order, report infractions, and serve as role models. But when push comes to shove, their toolbox is oddly empty. They are like knights sent to battle without swords, able to advise, warn, even scold, but not punish, not truly. It is a role heavy in image but light in authority. This imbalance becomes especially evident during moments of true crisis. Take the case of Draco Malfoy, a Slytherin prefect during Harry's 5th year. Known for his cruelty and arrogance, Draco used his badge to flaunt superiority. Yet when things went awry, when students hexed one another in the corridors or brawled during Quidditch practice, he had no sanctioned means to stop it. He could threaten, sneer, and run to Snape, but he could not act decisively on his own. This reveals the problem at its core. Prefects are expected to lead, but they are given no real authority to command. There is a telling moment in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when Ron Weasley, newly appointed as Gryffindor prefect, is left stunned by the responsibilities dumped upon him. As he trails behind Percy's echoing footsteps, Ron realizes that enforcing rules is far less glamorous than it sounds. He's expected to monitor curfews, patrol dark corridors, manage frightened first years during a thunderstorm, and mediate petty feuds, all without the support of magic meant for control or defense. There's no training manual, no defensive spell arsenal, no guaranteed backup from professors. It's trial by fire, fueled by expectation. And when rules are broken, as they often are in a school full of wand-wielding adolescents, prefects are the first to be blamed for failing to maintain order, not the staff, who vanish after hours, not the portraits or ghosts who observe but rarely intervene, prefects, teenagers with no real power. In this, the role becomes a kind of scapegoating mechanism. When Fred and George Weasley launch fireworks through the halls, or when Peeves drops chandeliers for sport, it is the prefects who are questioned about their patrol diligence, even though everyone knows Peeves answers to no one but the bloody Baron. This makes the prefect system feel less like a true delegation of power and more like a clever deflection of it. Professor McGonagall once told Harry, "I must say I thought you had the makings of a fine prefect," only to then admit that he wasn't chosen. That confession, offered like a consolation prize, reveals how arbitrary the selection process can be. And it underscores a deeper truth. Being a prefect is not about effectiveness, it's about image. It's about who looks like they can manage responsibility, not who is equipped to bear it. Consider Hermione Granger. As a prefect in her 5th year, Hermione took the title seriously. She organized study groups, gave younger students directions, and reminded them to tuck in their shirts or stop giggling in the library. But when chaos erupted, like during the Dumbledore's army meetings or when Umbridge began her reign of terror, Hermione's prefect status offered her no shield, no special leverage. In fact, she had to break the very rules she was supposed to uphold in order to protect what she believed was right. Her badge became more a source of internal conflict than a symbol of control. Even more damning is the comparison between prefects and the inquisitorial squad, a group formed by Dolores Umbridge that did have real power. Members like Malfoy and Pansy Parkinson were allowed to dock house points, forcibly remove students from classrooms, and even use physical force to restrain others. The contrast is brutal. Prefects, selected through tradition and merit, were sidelined. The squad, chosen through favoritism and sycophancy, wielded more authority in a month than prefects did in a year. It is a glaring indictment of how power is distributed not by justice, but by convenience. And yet the school continues to hold prefects accountable. They are the ones professors glance at when students misbehave. They are the ones asked, "Where were you during the incident?" or "Didn't you see it coming?" The head boy and girl might stand proudly at the welcoming feast, but behind that podium lies the anxiety of constant surveillance and silent judgment. Percy Weasley, in his pursuit of excellence, became a caricature of himself, so obsessed with following rules that he lost sight of compassion. He was a prefect without empathy and eventually a ministry puppet. His trajectory is a warning about what happens when responsibility is forced without guidance. One might argue that the prefect system is a lesson in leadership, a way to teach young witches and wizards to bear weight before they wield real influence. But that noble intent falls apart under scrutiny. True leadership requires support, mentorship, and tools. Hogwarts offers none of these. Prefects are not trained in conflict mediation, crisis response, or ethical dilemma handling. They are handed a badge and a list of duties. The rest they are expected to figure out on the fly. It is not preparation. It is abandonment dressed up in honor. Then there's the question of safety. When prefects accompany younger students through dimly lit corridors or intervene in brewing fights, they do so without magical reinforcement. They are expected to be brave, calm, and competent, but not once are they taught protective enchantments or given spells designed to de-escalate. It's a dangerous precedent. Hogwarts is no stranger to peril. Trolls in bathrooms, cursed hallways, and secret chambers are just part of the terrain. And yet the school sends its oldest students into the fray as unofficial guards, with zero magical backup. The problem becomes even more uncomfortable when viewed through the lens of liability. If a first year is injured under a prefect's watch, who takes the blame? Not the headmaster, not the ghostly sentinels, the prefect, whose only crime was trying to do a job they were unqualified and unsupported to perform. In Half-Blood Prince, when Katie Bell is cursed by a necklace, the panic that follows illustrates just how little authority even staff have over such incidents. And yet prefects were expected to notice something was off, to be vigilant, always. It also breeds resentment among peers. Prefects are given status, but without power, they must rely on moral persuasion. This quickly wears thin among classmates who know there are no real consequences for disobedience. Ron trying to discipline Peeves or first years throwing dung bombs is met with mockery. His authority is symbolic, not practical. It leaves prefects either frustrated or self-important, and often both. The badge is supposed to be a bridge between students and staff, but instead it becomes a symbol of Hogwarts' deeper dysfunction, a reluctance to confront its own gaps in oversight. Prefects patch holes in the ship, but they are not the crew steering it. They are given expectations without empowerment, titles without tools, and duties without defenses. Hogwarts, for all its magic, perpetuates a very Muggle problem, assigning responsibility without granting agency. And nowhere is that more evident than in its prefects who march through shadowed hallways with shining badges, but empty hands. 18. Why doesn't Hogwarts teach how to interact with Muggles? In the heart of the Scottish Highlands, hidden behind veils of enchantment, lies the ancient castle of Hogwarts. Its spires and moving staircases are legendary, as are the classes within its stone walls: transfiguration, potions, charms, and defense against the dark arts. Yet one glaring omission stands out to any outsider looking in: the curious absence of education about the non-magical world. For a school that claims to prepare young witches and wizards for life beyond its enchanted halls, Hogwarts seems to ignore a rather critical fact. The vast majority of the population in the United Kingdom, and indeed the world, are Muggles. Take, for example, Arthur Weasley, a man with endless fascination toward Muggle objects. His love for plug sockets, rubber ducks, and escalators is endearing, but beneath the surface of his curiosity lies a deep ignorance. He is the head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office at the Ministry of Magic, and yet he relies mostly on guesswork and assumptions. His obsession with how Muggles get along without magic is presented as a quirky trait, but it also reveals a dangerous gap in magical education. Arthur's knowledge, despite his enthusiasm, is self-taught. What if he had been given the tools to understand Muggle law, society, and technology properly? How different would the interactions between wizards and non-magical people be? When Hermione Granger chose to take Muggle studies in her third year, it was seen almost as a joke. She, after all, had been raised in the Muggle world. "But you already know all about Muggles, Hermione," Ron exclaimed. To him, and many others, the subject seemed unnecessary, useful only to those from pure-blood families. Yet even then, the curriculum of Muggle studies is treated as a curious aside, rather than a fundamental necessity. It is an elective. It is optional. In a society that must constantly hide itself from Muggle eyes and law, shouldn't understanding that world be mandatory? Consider the case of the accidental magic incidents. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, we witness Harry using magic in the presence of a Muggle, his cousin Dudley, during a Dementor attack. He is swiftly summoned to a disciplinary hearing at the Ministry, accused of breaking the International Statute of Secrecy. But nowhere in the school curriculum are students taught Muggle law or legal procedures. Harry, a 15-year-old, is left to face a Kafkaesque tribunal without any formal preparation. How many other students, especially those who don't have a Muggle-born friend like Hermione, go out into the world entirely unequipped to deal with such situations? There's also the simple matter of coexisting in a shared world. After graduation, many witches and wizards marry muggles or half-bloods. They shop in muggle stores, live in mixed neighborhoods, and some even work in muggle environments undercover. Tonks, a beloved Aura, comes from a mixed heritage family. Her father, Ted Tonks, was a muggle-born wizard. Surely their home straddled two worlds. But did her education at Hogwarts prepare her for the duality of that existence, or did she have to piece it together on her own? Even within the walls of the magical government, the gaps are glaring. Kingsley Shacklebolt, a highly competent Aura, is assigned to protect the Muggle Prime Minister during the Second Wizarding War. One might assume such an assignment would require at least basic training in Muggle affairs. And yet there is no indication that Hogwarts provides such instruction. Did Kingsley learn from personal interest, ministry crash courses, trial and error? In the absence of systemic education, even the most talented wizards are left scrambling. The real danger of this omission becomes clear when we look at Tom Riddle, Lord Voldemort himself. Born of a witch and a Muggle father, raised in a Muggle orphanage, Tom's experience with the non-magical world was coloured by pain, rejection, and a profound sense of superiority. Upon entering Hogwarts, he was not taught to understand Muggles, but rather how to hide from them. There was no guidance to bridge the two halves of his identity, no structured approach to making sense of the world he came from. Instead, the school offered escape, an escape into a world that reinforced his disdain for everything non-magical. Could early education in Muggle sociology have shaped him differently? This systemic negligence also sustains a subtle yet persistent classism. The idea that the Muggle world is less than unworthy of serious study pervades the culture. It's not that Muggle studies is an option, it's that it's treated as a joke. The teacher, Charity Burbage, who advocated for Muggle rights and intermarriage, was mocked and eventually murdered by Voldemort for her views. Her subject was never replaced after her death. No successor. No effort to continue the curriculum. It's as though the magical community collectively shrugged and decided the subject wasn't worth reviving. The irony is thick when one considers how dependent the magical world is on the Muggle one. Wizards live hidden, yes, but not isolated. They rely on Muggle infrastructure, Muggle governments, Muggle technology to some extent, and yet pure-blood students like Draco Malfoy are allowed to go through 7 years of magical education without ever being meaningfully exposed to Muggle culture or understanding the consequences of their prejudices. It is institutional negligence cloaked in tradition. Moreover, the few students who do study Muggles often learn distorted or outdated information. The syllabus, as described in passing, includes topics like how Muggles use electricity instead of magic. It's presented with a patronizing tone, not as a legitimate subject of cultural relevance. There's little indication that the course dives into Muggle politics, human rights, ethics, or even recent history. How do wizards learn about world wars, technological revolutions, or civil rights movements? The answer, they don't. This becomes a security risk as well. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore mentions that Voldemort's followers infiltrate both the magical and non-magical worlds. If Death Eaters understand Muggle systems better than the average wizard, then ignorance becomes vulnerability. How can the Ministry protect its citizens if its young are never taught how the outside world functions? How can magical people remain hidden if they don't even understand what they're hiding from? There's also the moral aspect. If Hogwarts is to foster responsible citizens, should it not also cultivate empathy and understanding? For Muggleborns like Hermione, it's easy, they bridge the worlds naturally. But for others, particularly those raised in insular environments, Muggle culture remains alien and suspicious. The result? Prejudice, misunderstandings, and a society divided not just by magic, but by education. Even those who eventually come to respect Muggles often do so despite their schooling, not because of it. Take Dean Thomas. He was raised in a Muggle household and navigated Hogwarts gracefully, yet there's little evidence that his perspective was ever used as a teaching tool. Hogwarts, instead of using its diverse student body to foster cross-cultural learning, pushes uniformity under the guise of magical tradition. When Harry visits the Ministry in the Deathly Hallows, he sees a new statue erected by the Voldemort-controlled regime. It depicts Muggles crushed beneath a magical throne, a visual metaphor for the pure-blood supremacist ideology. But the soil for such hate was fertile long before Voldemort returned. It was tilled by generations of magical education that prioritized ignorance over understanding, insulation over integration. It begs the question, what is Hogwarts really preparing its students for? A world of dragons and trolls, yes, but a world of taxes, laws, human rights and shared society? Absolutely not. And until that changes, the magical world will continue to raise generations of wizards and witches who can summon fire from thin air but remain blind to the ordinary world in which they must quietly live. 19. Why do students have to travel to Hogwarts on their own every year? Every year, like clockwork, magical families across Britain prepare for the Great Migration to Hogwarts. The ritual is the same each September 1st. Students pack their trunks, collect their owls and cats and travel, often with little to no adult supervision, to King's Cross Station in London. They slip past Muggles, locate the elusive barrier between platforms 9 and 10, and vanish into platform 934. From there, the Hogwarts Express takes them north to a castle hidden in the Highlands. But the question no one seems to ask aloud is perhaps the most uncomfortable of all. Why are children, some as young as 11, expected to undertake this journey with virtually no magical protection? It is not a simple commute. For many families, this journey spans the entire country. Parents of Muggle-born students like Hermione Granger must navigate unfamiliar magical norms, risk exposure of the magical world, and entrust their child's fate to a mysterious train and a half-glimpsed portal. Pure-blood families fare no better. Even the Weasleys, a family embedded in magical society, juggle 7 children across different years, yet the burden of transport rests solely on them. The Ministry of Magic, that ever-watchful institution that enforces secrecy and tracks wand misuse, remains oddly absent from this critical day. One might argue that the train itself is enchanted and secure, but that security doesn't begin until a child boards the train. Until then, each student is vulnerable. They must survive a crowded Muggle train station, a magical barrier, and a platform swarming with wizards and magical creatures. The threat of exposure to Muggles is immense. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Mrs. Weasley is seen loudly explaining how to enter the platform right in front of Harry, who had no idea what to do. "Best do it at a bit of a run if you're nervous," she says, oblivious to the fact that he is still a stranger to this world. This reliance on independent travel appears even more illogical when considering the Ministry's obsession with control. It monitors flu networks, restricts underage magic, and regulates magical creatures, yet it allows hundreds of students to descend on a public Muggle location with only the thinnest veil of secrecy. The lack of formal escort is especially baffling during periods of heightened danger. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the wizarding world is at war, and students are still sent to King's Cross with no official protection. The best the Ministry offers is some light security around the Hogwarts Express, security that failed to prevent Death Eaters from entering Hogsmeade just weeks later. Let us not forget that students travelling alone isn't merely inefficient, it's dangerous. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Dobby's tampering with the barrier nearly strands Harry and Ron outside the magical world. The two boys are left with no adult to consult and end up stealing a flying car. "What if we get caught?" Ron asks nervously. But they go anyway, crashing into the Whomping Willow and nearly getting expelled. The entire debacle could have been avoided had there been even one staff member stationed at the platform to provide guidance. The case of the Lovegoods is even more chilling. Luna Lovegood, a young and eccentric student, is shown travelling alone. With her father busy running the Quibbler, Luna appears to rely on herself. By her 4th year, she is abducted by Death Eaters on her way home for Christmas. They took her because of what he was printing, explains Mr. Ollivander, held captive with her. If a single student could be snatched without detection during a school break, why should the beginning of term be treated as any safer? Another striking example is the case of Neville Longbottom. In Philosopher's Stone, his grandmother loses him in the crowd and he is found wandering alone. Neville is a shy, forgetful boy, yet he is expected to navigate the chaos of King's Cross without dedicated adult guidance. What would have happened if he had missed the train entirely, if he had stumbled through the barrier at the wrong time? Hogwarts has no system in place to verify that each student made it on board, and the train has no roll call. The fact that Harry and Ron could fly to Hogwarts in a car, and no one even questioned their absence until they were already in the castle, reveals just how fragile this entire system is. Why hasn't the Ministry intervened? They seem more preoccupied with controlling the use of magic than protecting its youngest citizens. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry is nearly expelled for casting a Patronus to defend his cousin from Dementors. The Ministry reacts with swift bureaucratic wrath, summoning him to a full trial. Yet when Death Eaters are known to be attacking Muggle-borns and infiltrating magical spaces, they do nothing to supervise the vulnerable journey to school. The hypocrisy is stunning. Safety is enforced only when it aligns with political agendas. During the Triwizard Tournament, foreign students arrive via enchanted ships and carriages accompanied by headmasters and staff. These guests are treated with great care, transported magically and securely. The Durmstrang students emerge from the lake on a magical ship, while Beauxbaton students descend from the sky in a flying carriage. Meanwhile, British students continue arriving by a 19th century train that operates without magical surveillance. Are British wizarding children considered less valuable, or is this simply a relic of outdated tradition? And what about first years? At just 11 years old, they faced this journey alone. Many of them, like Harry, have never even seen Platform 934 before. Harry himself had no idea what the platform was or how to access it. If not for a chance meeting with the Weasleys, he might never have reached the train. No ministry official was there to greet him, no representative of Hogwarts to welcome new students. It is as though the magical world throws its young into the deep end and hopes for the best. This disregard for logistical care is echoed in the way students are sorted and housed. The sorting hat ceremony is performed moments after they disembark, with no time for orientation or support. They are herded across a lake in boats, another potential hazard, and introduced to a castle full of moving staircases, secret passageways and sentient paintings. There are no signs, no maps, and no adult companions beyond Hagrid, who is kind-hearted but not formally trained in child supervision. There is a peculiar dissonance in how the magical world views children. On one hand, they are forbidden from using magic outside school, subjected to rigid exams and penalized for breaking rules. On the other hand, they are expected to operate with a level of independence and risk that no Muggle parent would accept. This contrast is particularly jarring when considering how the Dursleys treat Harry, locking him in a cupboard, denying him letters and isolating him. The moment he steps into the magical world, he is met not with protection, but with benign neglect. This neglect reaches its peak during the Second Wizarding War. In Deathly Hallows, students who refuse to return to Hogwarts, or whose parents no longer trust the school, are branded as traitors. Those who do return face Carrow-controlled classrooms and a regime of punishment and torture. Yet the Ministry does not offer evacuation plans or safe transport. Children are expected to choose between exile and submission. This, more than anything, shows how little regard the magical government has for its youth. It is tempting to romanticize the Hogwarts Express, to see it as a charming bridge between childhood and magical destiny. But even the train itself is not safe. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Dementors are allowed to search the train, plunging it into darkness and terrorizing the students. Everything went cold, Harry recalls, and then I heard screaming. No adult intervenes in time. Professor Lupin is asleep in the compartment and only wakes when Harry faints. What if he hadn't been there at all? Tradition, it seems, is the only rationale behind this chaotic system. The train has run since 1855, a magical marvel created in secret by ministry decree. But longevity does not equal wisdom. Just because something has always been done a certain way does not mean it should continue. In a world where portraits talk, stairs move, and newspapers animate, surely there is a better way to get children to school, one that values safety over nostalgia. The truth is, the magical world is inconsistent in its priorities. It regulates what books students can read, what potions they can brew, and what spells they can perform. But when it comes to physically protecting them during one of the most exposed and vulnerable moments of the year, it simply looks away. There are no portkey stations, no assigned auras, no emergency backup plans. Only a red train, a hidden platform, and a hope that nothing goes wrong. For a society built on secrets and enchantments, it is a strangely reckless gamble. 20. Why do some subjects only appear in the upper years? In the quiet corners of Hogwarts Castle, where ancient portraits whisper and time-worn tapestries shimmer with magic, a curious inconsistency hides beneath the grandeur of education. It is not in the spells nor in the textbooks, but in the rhythm of the curriculum itself. Why are certain magical disciplines so intricately tied to the wizarding world's fabric, introduced only in the 3rd year or later? Take divination, care of magical creatures, astronomy and ancient runes, subjects dense with cultural, magical and practical value, yet they remain elusive in the early stages of a student's magical education. It is a puzzle rarely questioned aloud, but one that lingers in the minds of attentive readers and observant students alike. The 1st and 2nd years at Hogwarts are marked by foundational subjects: transfiguration, potions, charms, defense against the dark arts, and herbology. These are, no doubt, essential. They teach discipline, wand control, ingredients, and survival. But the abrupt arrival of several new subjects in 3rd year challenges this structure. Why are first-year students denied even the most basic exposure to astronomy, beyond a few vague mentions? J.K. Rowling tells us in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone that, at midnight, Harry and Hermione went up to the tallest tower to attend astronomy class. But the subject vanishes into the background shortly afterward. Its importance fades from the page, till it resurfaces only in exams or the occasional comment about the stars. If astronomy can shape magical outcomes, such as the timing of spells or the effects of celestial events, why is it presented with such casual brevity in the beginning? Consider the link between astronomy and other magical disciplines. In The Half-Blood Prince, we learn from Professor Slughorn that the phase of the moon can affect potion brewing, especially when dealing with unstable ingredients like powdered moonstone. This is not trivial knowledge. It could make the difference between a successful, calming draft and a disastrous explosion. Yet this information is not introduced until much later. Surely it would benefit students to understand such celestial influences from the very first year. A first-year accident in potions, perhaps the infamous incident where Seamus Finnegan managed to set his cauldron on fire, might have been avoided with a touch of astronomical foresight. Ancient runes is another striking example. Hermione Granger, the brightest student of her year, chooses to study runes in 3rd year. She later translates the tales of Beedle the Bard and deciphers clues crucial to Harry's quest in the Deathly Hallows. This subject is deeply embedded in the wizarding world's written heritage, magical contracts, and spell etymology. Yet students are given no introduction to magical languages or symbol-based magic in their early education. If Hogwarts prides itself on being a bastion of magical knowledge, why does it withhold the study of foundational magical linguistics until the midpoint of a student's education? Couldn't a simple Rune of the Week lesson from 1st year serve as a slow introduction, giving students a cultural and symbolic framework upon which later studies would flourish? Divination, dismissed by many professors, including McGonagall herself, as imprecise or woolly, is paradoxically one of the oldest magical traditions. It is rooted in wizarding history practiced by seers like Cassandra Trelawney, and even protected under ministry laws concerning prophecies. The entire plot of the series hinges on a prophecy made before Harry's birth, yet the subject is treated as a curiosity rather than a foundation. When Trelawney dramatically predicts Harry's death during his first divination lesson, it is played for humour, but by the time the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries is revealed, we realise its stakes are life and death. How can a subject so central to the fate of the magical world be kept hidden from young witches and wizards for 2 years? Care of magical creatures, taught by Hagrid with an unorthodox flair, is another discipline inexplicably postponed. Magical creatures are not rare occurrences. They appear in the Forbidden Forest, around the castle grounds, and even in casual wizarding life. Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback hatches in Hagrid's wooden hut during Harry's first year. Fluffy, the 3-headed dog, guards the Philosopher's Stone. Unicorns, hippogriffs, and centaurs make early appearances in the student's journey, and yet formal study of magical fauna is delayed until 3rd year. Why not begin with theoretical exposure in 1st year, using safer, contained examples, and progress to practical care in later years? The sudden plunge into the handling of creatures like hippogriffs or blast-ended scroots in 3rd year feels like an educational ambush rather than a natural progression. Even the structuring of electives reinforces the imbalance. Students are asked at the end of 2nd year to choose their additional subjects for 3rd year, but how can they make informed choices when they have had no contact with these disciplines? Hermione, of course, chooses nearly everything, relying on intellectual curiosity. Ron, less confident, struggles to choose, and later regrets some decisions. The system seems skewed towards students who already have exposure through family or books, leaving Muggle-borns and less informed students at a disadvantage. There is no suggestion that Hogwarts offers career counselling, preparatory seminars, or trial classes. The decision-making process is hurried, opaque, and arguably unfair. Moreover, magical education is not merely academic, it is cultural. Ancient runes holds keys to forgotten magics and lost civilizations. Astronomy connects students to the cosmos and imbues magic with a sense of universal rhythm. Divination, though unpredictable, teaches students to interpret signs and symbols, an ability valued even among non-magical cultures. The late introduction of these subjects suggests a hierarchy of knowledge that favors utility over wonder. Hogwarts, for all its magic, at times mirrors the very limitations of the Muggle world it seeks to transcend. The inconsistency becomes even more apparent when we consider the role these subjects play in the adult wizarding world. Cursebreakers for Gringotts rely heavily on ancient runes. Aurors are trained in magical creatures and their uses or dangers. Potioneers must understand astrological cycles, and unspeakables guard the secrets of time and prophecy. Yet these vital fields are not treated with foundational importance in the early years of schooling. Instead, they are tacked on mid-education, as though they are elective flourishes rather than essential components of magical life. A counter-argument could be made that young minds need time to mature before tackling complex subjects. But complexity is not exclusive to electives. Transfiguration, introduced from day one, is an extraordinarily difficult subject, bordering on dangerous. McGonagall warns students that misapplied transfiguration can have serious consequences. If students are trusted with the fundamentals of transformation magic from the first week of school, they could surely handle symbolic languages or basic celestial awareness. The notion that runes or care of magical creatures are too advanced for first years does not hold when balanced against the challenges they already face in their core subjects. The argument also breaks down when one considers the role of certain students in the wider plot. Luna Lovegood, for example, is deeply connected to magical creatures and displays intuitive understanding of beings like Thestrals. Her knowledge is not learned from a textbook, it is part of her upbringing. Had more students received such exposure earlier, perhaps the understanding and empathy toward magical beings would be more widespread. Similarly, the comprehension of prophecies, omens, and magical fate might not be mocked if introduced in a structured, respectful way from the beginning. Another example lies in Barty Crouch Jr.'s impersonation of Mad-Eye Moody during Harry's 4th year. One of the ways he manipulates the students is through knowledge of magical objects and creatures. A more balanced education, spanning all disciplines from the start, might have given students the tools to question, resist, or at least recognize manipulation. Education in the magical world is not merely about academic success. It is often a matter of survival. Even in standardized assessments, this imbalance reveals itself. The OWL and NEWET exams include questions from subjects that are offered for fewer years, sometimes cramming 5 years of content into 2. Students are expected to show deep understanding and application in fields they had little time to explore. The stress and confusion this causes could be mitigated by introducing these subjects earlier, gradually building familiarity instead of forcing a sprint. Perhaps the clearest evidence of this strange curricular design is found in the way certain subjects are treated narratively. They vanish and reappear, their presence dictated more by plot than pedagogy. Divination becomes important when prophecy is relevant. Runes matter when Hermione needs to decipher something. Astronomy returns during AWLs. These reappearances feel less like educational structure and more like literary convenience. But if we view Hogwarts as a real institution, not merely a fictional stage, these omissions become harder to justify. A re-evaluation of the magical curriculum might offer a better balance between theory and practice, between foundational learning and curiosity-driven exploration. A 10-year-old Muggle child learns world history and elementary physics. Why not offer a wizard child the building blocks of magical history and symbolic thought early on? This would not overwhelm but inspire. A class that teaches simple rune meanings, the names of constellations, the basic categories of magical creatures, it would set the stage for richer learning, better choices, and perhaps even safer students. Hogwarts remains, to readers and characters alike, a place of wonder. But beneath its moving staircases and talking hats lies a strange silence around the sequence of learning. Knowledge delayed is often knowledge denied. If the magical world holds that the future is unknowable, then why should its youngest minds be asked to choose, blindfolded, what they may someday need to survive? The answer is not in the stars, but perhaps it should be. 21. Why is there almost no education on finances or money management? In the dimly lit corridors of Hogwarts, where portraits whisper and staircases shift without warning, generations of young witches and wizards have learned to tame dragons, brew deadly potions, and defend themselves from the dark arts. But among all the ancient tomes, incantations, and spellcasting drills, there is a peculiar silence that echoes louder than Peeves's cackling laughter, the absence of any structured education in finance. Despite living in a world rich with goblins, vaults, galleons, and financial contracts, not a single class teaches students how to manage money in the wizarding economy. This absence is not just curious, it is dangerous. From the very first visit to Diagon Alley, young wizards are introduced to a dazzling yet bewildering economic system. A first-year student like Harry Potter, who had never even heard of wizard currency, is suddenly handed a key to a Gringotts vault filled with gold. The vault is inherited, of course, but what about those who are not lucky enough to be born into wealth? For children like the Weasleys, money is a constant shadow. Mrs. Weasley budgets carefully, often reusing robes and books for her children, but nowhere in Hogwarts do her children learn how to better their economic standing. The wizarding world is built on gold, yet its educational institutions seem content to let students stumble into adulthood without the slightest financial compass. The Gringotts Bank looms as a monolithic institution, mysterious, powerful, and guarded by creatures known for their secretiveness and mistrust of humans. But how does one open an account? Is there a savings plan? Do vaults accrue interest? Or are they simply glorified safes? These questions remain unanswered. Even Harry, who visits Gringotts multiple times, never learns the financial mechanics of his inheritance. He blindly withdraws galleons, never questioning their value or management. Hagrid handed Harry his money from the vault, Rowling writes in The Sorcerer's Stone, with no mention of how the funds are tracked or protected. If the boy who lived is kept in the dark, what hope is there for the average witch or wizard? And what of taxes? We know from the books that the Ministry of Magic funds various departments: the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and others. Arthur Weasley holds a government job, implying a salaried position funded by some kind of taxation. But who pays? Do businesses like Flourish and Blots or the Leaky Cauldron file annual reports? Are there penalties for magical tax evasion? Hogwarts never broaches the topic. Students may learn how to vanish a hedgehog or summon a broomstick, but they will graduate knowing nothing about government finances or their own future contributions to magical society. In a world teeming with magical professions, from dragon tamers to curse breakers, financial literacy should be as essential as one technique. Bill Weasley works for Gringotts, travelling to Egypt to break ancient curses and secure treasure. His job is high risk and clearly lucrative. But how does one enter such a field? Does it require an apprenticeship, a fee, or a loan for training? These practical pathways are shrouded in mystery. The career advice offered at Hogwarts is laughably thin: vague pamphlets, brief interviews, and minimal guidance. It is no wonder that so many students, like Fred and George Weasley, turn to entrepreneurship without any formal grounding in business management. The twins' venture, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, is a prime example of economic ingenuity met with systemic neglect. They build a successful shop from scratch, experimenting with product design, branding, and market expansion. Yet they do so with no training whatsoever. Their education at Hogwarts did not include even a single lesson on business licensing, profit margins, or customer service. Instead, they relied on risk, instinct, and a generous investment from Harry. That the school took no interest in fostering or supporting such innovation reveals a deep failure in its curriculum. Fred and George succeeded not because of Hogwarts, but in spite of it. Magical creatures, too, bring enormous financial obligations. Hagrid, ever the lover of dangerous beasts, raises everything from hippogriffs to blast-ended scroots. But how much does it cost to feed a hippogriff? Are there licenses for owning them? What about insurance in case a creature injures someone, as Buckbeak did to Draco Malfoy? These are not small concerns. Families could lose fortunes over a single careless incident, yet students are taught creature care with no mention of the legal or economic responsibilities involved. The entire subject of care of magical creatures, taught with Hagrid's heartfelt enthusiasm, remains romantically detached from the real-world burdens it implies. Even the matter of spell usage raises uncomfortable financial questions. Can magical services be billed? Do healers at St. Mungo's charge fees like Muggle doctors? If so, is there magical health insurance? When Arthur Weasley was attacked by Nagini, the Weasleys spent days at the hospital. Who paid for his treatment? The books never say. Magic is not free. It requires tools, ingredients, and expertise. But Hogwarts avoids explaining the economic cost of magic as if the very idea is vulgar. Yet in the real wizarding world, surely such concerns matter deeply to families struggling to make ends meet. This glaring omission becomes even more jarring when one considers the reality awaiting Hogwarts graduates. Once they leave the enchanted castle, they are thrust into a society with rent, bills, career demands, and possibly debt. Take Remus Lupin, for example. A brilliant student and former professor, he lives in poverty, unable to secure stable work due to his condition. But does he receive a disability stipend from the ministry? Is there a magical welfare system? The lack of transparency and support reveals a deeply flawed structure that education should aim to reform, but Hogwarts remains indifferent. When students enter their final year, the pressure to choose a path becomes intense. Yet most of them, like Ron and Hermione, have no real grasp of the economic realities of their decisions. Hermione's parents are Muggles, dentists who run a private practice. It's safe to assume they understand taxation, business expenses, and accounting. But does Hermione bring any of that knowledge into her magical life? The books never suggest she does. Even she, the brightest witch of her age, appears unaware of how magical finances operate. Her focus remains noble causes and magical law, not economic empowerment. The divide between magical and financial literacy is perhaps most glaring in the world of potions. Potion ingredients are expensive, volatile, and often rare. A single mistake can ruin a costly brew. Snape never mentions the cost of ingredients, nor does he teach his students how to budget or plan, and yet in the real world potioneers would surely need to price their work, manage supply chains, and invoice clients. From love potions to Veritaserum, every concoction is part of a hidden economy that Hogwarts refuses to acknowledge. It's a dangerous gap, one that leaves even the best students unprepared for the adult world. Consider also the legal implications of magical finance. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore bequeaths items in his will, and the Ministry painstakingly examines each. The process is formal and regulated. Clearly, there is magical estate law, yet none of the students learn about it. No one teaches them how to write a will, manage inheritance, or navigate property disputes. These are not abstract ideas, they are life realities. Wizards own homes, land, and possessions, all of which must be managed. The fact that Hogwarts graduates remain ignorant of these basics is a systemic failure. Then there's the issue of class and access. Wealth in the wizarding world is not evenly distributed. Families like the Malfoys enjoy generational wealth and power, while others like the Diggorys and Tonks lead modest lives. Without financial education, these gaps only widen. Hogwarts, instead of being a great equalizer, becomes a place where privilege is silently reinforced. A student with money can buy a better broomstick, afford private tutoring, or invest in a business idea. One without money must rely on charity or go without. If the school taught financial empowerment, it could give all students the tools to rise, but it does not. Perhaps the unspoken logic is that magic will solve everything, that spells can replace salaries, that transfiguration can conjure comfort, that a well-aimed wand will wipe away hunger or debt. But this is a fantasy within a fantasy. Even magic has limits, and the books repeatedly show this. The Weasleys remain poor, the Ministry is inefficient, Gringotts is vulnerable. The world Rowling created is rich, flawed, and deeply realistic. And yet its school remains locked in the ivory tower, blind to the struggles its students will inevitably face. If Hogwarts truly aims to prepare its students for the real world, it must reckon with its own silence. The question of money may be inconvenient, even crude, in the hallowed halls of magic, but it is necessary. Because no matter how many spells a student masters, if they don't know how to survive, how to earn, manage, and protect their resources, they are still unarmed in the face of reality. A galleon, after all, is just a coin. But financial ignorance, that is a curse no magic can lift. 22. Why are nearly all school traditions based on fear and danger? In the majestic Great Hall of Hogwarts, with its floating candles and enchanted ceiling, children arrive wide-eyed, hearts pounding with anticipation. Yet this magical setting conceals a deeper and more disturbing truth. Hogwarts, for all its beauty, enforces traditions that are drenched in fear. From the very beginning, new students are subjected to a ritual that can only be described as psychological warfare, the sorting ceremony. 11-year-olds, fresh off the train, are forced to sit alone before an ancient, talking hat that delves into their minds, publicly judges them, and places them into one of 4 houses that will define their social identity for the rest of their school years. The Sorting Hat once sang, "Oh, know the perils, read the signs, the warning history shows, for our Hogwarts is in danger from external deadly foes." A hat meant to comfort, instead offers prophetic threats and ominous warnings. shaping a child's introduction to magical education with apprehension. It would be one thing if the ceremony stopped at harmless categorization. But the very essence of Hogwarts' structure is competition, pitting the houses against one another in a relentless battle for points, prestige, and dominance. The House Cup becomes an obsession, where victories are cheered not because they reflect academic or moral excellence, but because they humiliate the other houses. Students are rewarded or punished, not always fairly, but based on the whims of teachers. In Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore awards Gryffindor last-minute points for pure nerve and outstanding courage, reversing Slytherin's victory and sending a clear message. Courage matters more than consistency or fairness. It is a classic reinforcement of the idea that surprise valor is superior to sustained effort. The system is not just arbitrary, it is divisive. And then there's the Forbidden Forest. What could be more ironic than using a deadly, monster-infested area as a place of punishment for students? When Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Draco are caught out of bed in their first year, their punishment is not detention in the form of writing lines or helping Filch scrub the dungeons. No, they are sent into the Forbidden Forest at night, where centaurs speak in riddles, and a blood-drinking creature is on the loose. There's something in there that's been killing unicorns, Hagrid tells them. This is not a deterrent. It is a gamble with children's lives. Why is the most dangerous part of the grounds also the go-to place for student discipline? Even the classroom experience at Hogwarts is tinged with fear. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor Snape repeatedly humiliates Neville Longbottom, a timid boy already struggling with self-confidence. When Neville's boggart appears, it takes the form of Snape himself, clear evidence that his teacher is his worst fear. Dumbledore, the headmaster who is often painted as wise and benevolent, does little to intervene. The culture permits, even encourages fear as a learning tool. Instead of nurturing students, Hogwarts allows its professors to wield power with intimidation. Dolores Umbridge took this tradition to the extreme with her quill that carved words into Harry's hand. But even before her tyranny, fear had always lived in the curriculum. The Triwizard Tournament is perhaps the most glaring example of the school's disturbing traditions. Revived in Goblet of Fire, the tournament was originally banned due to the sheer number of student deaths, and yet it was brought back with fanfare, promoted as a noble competition. Students cheered, teachers smiled, the ministry supported it, but the tasks were brutal, diving into a lake full of merpeople, navigating a deadly maze, and fighting a dragon. Even before the arrival of Lord Voldemort at the climax, the tournament was a string of potential fatalities. Cedric Diggory dies, but the horror isn't in the death alone, it's in the adult's blindness to the stakes. This was a school event, yet Dumbledore admits, "We were all fools." That sentence, spoken after tragedy, is the only acknowledgement that perhaps they should have known better. The traditions at Hogwarts often resemble rituals designed not to nurture young minds but to weed out the weak. From the first flying lesson, where students are expected to mount brooms and fly with little instruction, to the constant threat of expulsion for honest mistakes, the environment is one of survival. In Philosopher's Stone, when Neville breaks his wrist falling off a broom, Madame Hooch flies him to the hospital wing but leaves the other students unsupervised. This allows Draco to steal a Remembrall and challenge Harry to a duel mid-air. The teacher's failure to maintain order directly results in further risk. The implication is clear. If you survive the danger, you're rewarded. If you don't, you're forgotten. Exams and homework are not the only pressures on students. There is a constant undercurrent of threat from within the castle itself. The staircase moves randomly, doors sometimes require tickling to open, and paintings can be aggressive or uncooperative. The school is a labyrinth of surprises, many of them dangerous. The room of requirement is accessible only to those who desperately need it, yet its very secrecy means it often hides more than it reveals. Hogwarts is an architectural puzzle box designed more to confuse than to support its students. The castle is Not a passive location, it actively challenges its inhabitants. Even the ghosts, which could have served as comforting guides to the past, are instead reminders of violent death. The Bloody Baron, drenched in blood, is a silent menace. Nearly headless Nick tells the story of his execution with a grim humour that hides trauma. The very presence of moaning Myrtle haunting the girl's bathroom where she died is a continual reminder that Hogwarts is not safe. Myrtle was killed by the basilisk in the plumbing system of the school, and yet her death was never truly investigated. The Chamber of Secrets remained hidden for decades, even as students were regularly endangered. The idea that Hogwarts is a place of learning becomes increasingly difficult to believe when we consider the frequent presence of mortal peril. The school year in Chamber of Secrets was almost cancelled due to student petrifications. In Half-Blood Prince, cursed objects entered the castle with ease. Katie Bell nearly dies from touching a necklace. In Order of the Phoenix, the Department of Mysteries battle leads to the death of Sirius Black. And yet every year the students are brought back, as if the trauma of last year has been forgotten or dismissed. The magical world has normalized danger to such a degree that trauma becomes a rite of passage. The defense against the dark arts position itself is cursed. Every year, a new professor replaces the last, often leaving chaos behind. Quirrell dies, Lockhart loses his mind, Lupin resigns after being exposed as a werewolf, Moody was an imposter, Umbridge tortured students, Snape murders Dumbledore. The position is a revolving door of instability, and yet no effort is made to break the curse or to shield students from its effects. The instability becomes part of the culture, a mystery that is amusing rather than alarming. The school does not provide counselors, trauma support, or mental health services. When Harry experiences nightmares and PTSD symptoms following Cedric's death, he is offered no help. When Neville is bullied, he receives no comfort. When students suffer injuries or near-death experiences, they are treated with potions but not with empathy. Madame Pomfrey may heal bones, but there is no one in the castle to heal minds. Hogwarts prepares students for magical duels but not for emotional resilience. It teaches them to cast spells but not to face fear in healthy ways. Tradition is often used as the justification for all of this. The sorting hat has always been used, so it continues. The houses have always competed, so they must. The forest has always been forbidden and dangerous, so it remains so. But tradition without reflection becomes cruelty. If something traumatizes children, why is its longevity a defense? In the Muggle world, such practices would prompt lawsuits, investigations, and reforms. In the magical world, they are praised for being just how things are. And in this, Hogwarts reveals a deep resistance to change. The wizarding world has an uneasy relationship with reform. Dolores Umbridge is the caricature of misguided reform, but her presence highlights how much the magical community fears change. Any attempt to question the system is met with suspicion. When Hermione forms SPEW to advocate for house elf rights, she is mocked. When Harry questions Dumbledore's decisions, he is met with silence or vague platitudes. The implication is clear. The system may be flawed, but it must not be challenged. The cost of challenging it is ostracization. In truth, Hogwarts reflects the broader dysfunction of the wizarding world. It is a society that values blood status, where pure-blood supremacy is not just a Death Eater ideology, but a cultural undercurrent. The school's failure to modernize, to protect, and to empathize mirrors the failures of the Ministry of Magic. From Cornelius Fudge's denialism to Rufus Scrimgeour's manipulation, the leaders of the magical world perpetuate fear to maintain control, and Hogwarts, the supposed sanctuary of youth, is not exempt from this pattern. It is a training ground for it. In the end, Hogwarts is both wondrous and wounding. It raises heroes, but often through ordeal rather than support. It creates legends, but often at the expense of childhood. The question we must ask is not whether Hogwarts is magical, but whether that magic has a price too high for young hearts to pay. 23. Why doesn't the school verify a student's background and identity before admission? In a world where magic can conceal, transform, and deceive, it is astonishing how fragile the foundation of Hogwarts security truly appears to be. The castle, revered as a sanctuary of magical learning, is also a place where deception has thrived under the very noses of those entrusted with the protection of young witches and wizards, while the curriculum teaches defensive spells and potions. Of truth, the institution itself seems alarmingly disinterested in verifying the true identity of its own students and staff. This unsettling oversight becomes particularly glaring when revisiting two deeply disturbing cases that raise the same troubling question. Why does Hogwarts not verify who it is letting through its gates? Consider the case of Peter Pettigrew, a man whose betrayal led to the deaths of Lily and James Potter, and the unjust imprisonment of Sirius Black. For 12 years, this known Death Eater hid in plain sight within the very walls of Hogwarts. Not only did he remain undetected by staff and students alike, but he did so in his animagus form, a rat. As Scabbers, he lived in the Gryffindor dormitory, was fed and petted by Ron Weasley, and listened to every conversation between Harry Potter and his friends. His very presence there meant that a wanted criminal, one who had betrayed the Order of the Phoenix, lived side by side with the boy who lived, without a shred of suspicion falling upon him. What's more unsettling is not just that Pettigrew escaped justice for over a decade, but that no magical measure ever revealed his presence. The Marauder's Map, an enchanted piece of parchment designed by James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Pettigrew himself, had the power to reveal every living soul within the castle. Harry used it to sneak out of Hogwarts. Fred and George used it to prank teachers. And yet no adult, no professor, no headmaster ever demanded such a tool be used for the school's protection. Lupin himself as a professor. During Pettigrew's final year in hiding, had access to the map. When he realized what it showed, he was shaken. "I saw him on the map," Lupin later admitted. "I thought the map was malfunctioning." But the map wasn't broken. It was simply never part of the school's standard security. But perhaps the more terrifying breach of identity came during Harry's 4th year, with the arrival of Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, or rather, the man everyone thought was Mad-Eye. For an entire academic year, Hogwarts hosted Bartemius Crouch Jr., a Death Eater using Polyjuice Potion to impersonate the retired Auror. Under Dumbledore's watch and with the full trust of the staff, Crouch Jr. not only taught defense against the dark arts, but gained intimate access to every student, including Harry. He manipulated the Triwizard Tournament to ensure Harry's victory in the tasks. He brought Harry directly to Lord Voldemort, and no one, not even the seasoned Dumbledore, suspected a thing. Crouch Jr. was so convincing in his disguise that even the staff who had known Moody for years did not raise concerns. The impostor was an incredibly good actor, as Dumbledore later explained. But should it have come to that? Where was the verification? Where was the magical equivalent of a background check or identity confirmation? If a single man with a steady supply of Polyjuice Potion can deceive an entire school of witches and wizards, what does that say about the robustness of Hogwarts' protections? The existence of spells like Legilimens or Veritaserum, truth potions capable of revealing inner thoughts and truths, further complicates the question. These tools exist, they are known, and yet they are not employed to verify the credentials or the essence of the individuals who enter the castle. It's not a matter of magical limitation, but of willful negligency. Even a simple prior incantato spell could reveal what wand a person has used recently. Yet these tools remain unused in the admissions process and hiring decisions alike. Dumbledore as headmaster has always been painted as a figure of immense wisdom. He once said, "You will find that I will only truly have left this school when none here are loyal to me." But loyalty is a dangerous thing when misplaced. His deep belief in second chances and personal judgment often came at the cost of rational security procedures. He trusted Snape despite his past. He trusted Hagrid despite his expulsion. And while these decisions may have been morally justified, they reveal a broader pattern. the school relies on character assumptions over concrete identification. In a magical world, identity is an unstable concept. With Polyjuice Potion, one can assume another's appearance for a full hour. With the Animagus transformation, a wizard can become an entirely different species. Glamour charms, illusions, memory modifications. There are 100 ways to hide your true self. And yet Hogwarts continues to function on the assumption that everyone is who they say they are. There is no known magical passport, no registry that confirms the identity of each incoming student or staff member. Even when Dumbledore brings Tom Riddle to Hogwarts, he is content with a few conversations and the testimony of an orphanage matron. He never investigates Riddle's background with any magical rigor, and as a result the school ends up harboring a boy who will grow into the darkest wizard in history. The train to Hogwarts leaves from platform 9 3/4, a passage protected only by the ignorance of Muggles, but once aboard there are no checks, no verifications, no magical customs officers. A polyjuiced imposter could easily step onto the train in a child's form and reach the school undetected. And from there they are assigned a house, given a wand, and granted access to the deepest magical knowledge in Britain. All it takes is a bit of acting. Even the enchanted objects used within the school raise concerns. The sorting hat, for instance, is said to peer into the very soul of a student, but it does not question identity. It does not expose deception. If it had, it would have screamed when Bartemius Crouch Jr. passed under its brim, or when Pettigrew crawled onto Ron's bed at night. Its magic is specific, tailored to character traits, not truthfulness. Hogwarts' magical defenses are not built for deception. They are built for combat, for defense against spells, not against lies. There's also the lack of parental verification. When Sirius Black is believed to be a threat, the solution is to send Dementors to patrol the grounds. Yet in all this panic, no one questions whether students might be used as pawns or whether someone like Pettigrew could already be inside. Not once does Dumbledore scan the student body. Not once is there mention of protective spells to ensure no one is an unregistered animagus. It's as though identity is a concept taken entirely on faith. If a Death Eater can teach at Hogwarts undetected, if a murderer can live in the dormitories for years, then the notion of Hogwarts as a sanctuary becomes a comforting myth. Even Harry, the school's most watched student, is repeatedly endangered due to this systemic blind spot. From Tom Riddle's preserved diary that nearly kills Ginny Weasley to Umbridge's infiltration under ministry orders, Hogwarts is vulnerable, not just to external attack, but internal subversion. Magic can illuminate, but it can also obscure. And in a world where deception is easy, where potions and spells allow transformation and concealment, security must be built not on trust alone, but on verification. The very idea that Hogwarts does not employ magical verification of identity is more than an oversight. It is a crack in the fortress, a flaw in the spell. It suggests that the school, for all its ancient spells and ghostly portraits, still relies on assumptions better suited to a world without magic. The question, then, is no longer whether this oversight is dangerous. It demonstrably is. The question is why such a revered institution, led by some of the wisest witches and wizards of the age, continues to ignore this vulnerability. Is it arrogance, tradition, or something more disturbing? A belief that those who lie and deceive will simply reveal themselves eventually. As history shows, that is a belief repeatedly proven false. For a world obsessed with bloodlines, the wizarding community does shockingly little to confirm the legitimacy of its own kind. Pure-blood families keep detailed genealogies. The ministry monitors magical births. Yet the institution tasked with shaping the minds of magical youth allows itself to be blind. As readers, we are left to wonder whether the walls of Hogwarts are truly protecting its students, or simply offering a beautifully enchanted stage for the darkest kind of performance. 24. Why are there no magical security systems at night? When Sirius Black broke into Gryffindor Tower in The Prisoner of Azkaban, slashing the fat lady's portrait and vanishing without a trace, it wasn't just the students who were terrified, it was the readers. Here was a convicted murderer, reportedly the most dangerous wizard alive, managing to infiltrate a magical boarding school renowned for being one of the safest places in the wizarding world. It wasn't an isolated incident. Again and again, from Chamber of Secrets to Deathly Hallows, Hogwarts seemed to suffer from a recurring vulnerability, a blatant lack of magical security, especially at night. The most pressing question is not how these intrusions happened, but why no magical alarms, barriers, or surveillance spells were in place to prevent them in the first place. The castle is enchanted to repel Muggles, sure. It hides itself from view, offers misleading directions, and shifts its staircases. But once a threat crosses that magical boundary, whether it's a basilisk slithering through pipes, a cursed diary whispering lies, or Death Eaters storming the Astronomy Tower, the defences fall silent. For all its ancient glory, Hogwarts at night is a surprisingly unprotected place. Poltergeist Peeves, known for dumping ink on students and causing general havoc, is given free rein to haunt corridors unchallenged. It's one thing to tolerate mischief during daylight hours, when teachers and prefects are watching. But at night, when children are asleep, one would think a spectral menace like Peeves would trigger some kind of containment spell. Instead, he barrels through walls and ceilings, making noise, smashing items, and playing cruel jokes. There is no mention of magical restrictions on his movement, no charm that alerts staff when he begins tormenting someone. For a school so full of magic, its nighttime defences are shockingly analog. Consider again the fat lady. When Sirius Black attacked her portrait in his attempt to enter the Gryffindor common room, she refused entry, as expected, but was not protected by any automatic retaliatory spell or alarm. She had to flee and hide in another painting. "He's gone!" she gasped in fear, according to the narration in the third book. One would imagine that any attempt to damage a key entrance would trigger something more serious than a few days of heightened security. Yet the students are simply told to be careful and escorted by teachers for a few nights, after which the danger is more or less accepted as normal. Even more troubling is the fact that Sirius managed this entry while being in his animagus dog form. This means he bypassed any potential wards that might have reacted to a human presence. In a world where spells can detect the trace of magic, identify unregistered animagi, and even map out human movement, as the Marauders map does with unnerving accuracy, it is shocking that Dumbledore and his staff never deployed similar magical safeguards in the castle's corridors or dormitory areas. Why wasn't the Marauders map, a student-made artifact, ever reproduced or reimagined into an official security tool? Perhaps the most damning example of magical security failure is the night when Death Eaters entered Hogwarts through the Vanishing Cabinet. Draco Malfoy, a student, managed to repair a dangerous magical object and use it to allow several adult enemies of the school to infiltrate its very heart. They arrived without setting off any magical detection system. No spell warned the professors. No enchanted object blinked red in Dumbledore's office. No portrait came running with news. It was only when Dumbledore was already cornered at the top of the tower that his defenders realized the breach had occurred. And by then, it was too late. It's not just adults who sneak in either. In the Philosopher's Stone, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville wander around the castle at night with little more than a cloak and a hope not to get caught. They run into Fluffy, a massive three-headed dog guarding a deadly secret without anyone stopping them. No spell alerts the staff, no door resists entry. The only real barrier is the risk of being seen by Filch, a squib with no magical ability. It's comical, tragic even, that the most consistent nighttime deterrent in the castle is an old man with a lantern and a cat. This reliance on human vigilance rather than magical intervention is baffling, especially when we remember the kinds of spells the average student can cast. Even a third year like Hermione Granger is capable of conjuring a full-grown Patronus, an immensely powerful magical creature that can fight off Dementors. Older students can use protective spells like Protego, locking charms, and even hexes, yet nowhere in the text is there mention of enchantments on the corridors, wards on the dormitories, or surveillance charms to detect intent. Why are these not institutionalized? Why isn't there a school-wide hominum revelio every night to detect unexpected human presence? Some might argue that Hogwarts is ancient and its magic unpredictable, but its magical unpredictability seems to favor whimsy over safety. The stairs move, rooms shift, and doors require riddles, but nothing about these quirks functions as a security measure. The Room of Requirement, in particular, is an enormous security blind spot. It can become anything, store anything, hide anyone. It's a space so powerful that Dumbledore's army used it for months without discovery. When even the headmaster can't keep track of rooms in his own school, something is terribly wrong with the system. Let's not forget the Forbidden Forest. Technically out of bounds to students, it borders the school and is filled with dangerous creatures, including giant spiders, centaurs, and even werewolves. Yet the only thing stopping a creature from wandering into the castle is luck, and perhaps Hagrid's casual patrols. There is no barrier, no protective dome, no perimeter ward described in the books. The same forest that harbours murderous acromantulas is a few steps away from a school for children. The implications are horrifying. Even within the castle itself, the ghosts move freely, observing everything but interfering with nothing. Nearly headless Nick sees much, says little, and never acts. The Bloody Baron is feared, but not contained. No ghost has ever been described as triggering a security measure or being employed as part of the school's defense. In any Muggle institution, cameras would have replaced them. In a magical one, it seems even spectral witnesses are ignored when it comes to nightly protection. One must wonder what the headmaster's role truly entails. Dumbledore is known for his power, his intelligence, his ability to cast spells no one else dares attempt. Yet, when it comes to protecting his students from nightly danger, he is oddly passive. His faith in the goodness of some people, like believing in Snape or trusting Malfoy to fail, is not a security policy. It is philosophy masquerading as protection. Children should not depend on the headmaster's mood swings for their safety. It would not be difficult to imagine solutions. Charms like Cave Inimicum, Homenum Revelio, and Protego Totalum could easily be adapted to create a magical alert system. Enchanted statues could animate upon detecting motion after hours. House ghosts could report suspicious behavior. The portraits, already known to travel between frames and observe everything, could serve as an intelligence network. Yet none of these systems are in place, or if they are so ineffective that they might as well be myth. The contrast between what's possible and what's implemented is perhaps the most jarring part of this magical negligence. Students can be jinxed by prank spells, bullied in hallways, even cursed in duels, and still the system does not adapt. When Katie Bell is cursed by a necklace meant for Dumbledore, it's only the accident itself that draws attention, not the fact that a powerful dark object made its way inside the castle. Where was the spell that scans for dark artifacts? Where was the barrier that should have flared the moment the necklace crossed the gate? Magic in the Harry Potter world is not limited by technology or resources. It is limited by imagination and intent, and in the case of Hogwarts security, it appears that no one has imagined or cared enough to design a comprehensive magical system to protect students at night. The real question then is not whether the magic exists. It does. The question is, why has no one chosen to use it? And what does that say about the priorities of the people in charge? 25. Why doesn't Hogwarts adapt its education to different age groups? At the age of 11, Harry Potter stepped through the heavy oak doors of Hogwarts for the first time. He was a boy who had never known love, never held a wand, never even heard of Quidditch. Within days, he was learning how to levitate objects with a swish and a flick, dodging curses in class and watching a troll stomp through a girl's bathroom. There was no orientation, no safety net, no counselor to ask, "How are you holding up?" The castle welcomed children like Harry as though they were born ready, no room for emotional preparation, no recognition of developmental stages. Magic was the great equalizer and apparently the great justification for neglecting age-appropriate care. Most educational systems in the non-magical world recognize that 11-year-olds and 17-year-olds need different kinds of support. There are school counselors, adaptation periods, orientation weeks, classroom assistants, and tailored approaches depending on age and cognitive maturity. But Hogwarts throws children of vastly different emotional and psychological capacities into the same ancient stone corridors where moving staircases, secret passageways, and malicious poltergeists are part of the daily experience. Even Peeves, the resident spirit of chaos, shows no mercy to first years, often targeting them for pranks and sabotage. No authority figure intervenes. No one pulls Peeves aside to say, "They're new, give them time." Instead, the culture of Hogwarts is silent on such matters, as though resilience is assumed rather than cultivated. Consider the very first flying lesson with Madam Hooch. No safety nets, no emotional preparation, just an open field and brooms that buck like wild stallions. When Neville Longbottom crashes spectacularly and breaks his wrist, Madam Hooch storms off to take him to the hospital wing, leaving a dozen unsupervised children alone with dangerous equipment. It's not just an oversight, it's a systemic norm. No one questions why this is acceptable, it's tradition. Hogwarts has functioned this way for centuries, and so it must be right. But imagine an 11-year-old who's never been more than 3 feet off the ground suddenly expected to soar 40 feet high with no psychological preparation and no fallback mechanism. Is bravery really innate, or is it forced? Even the Sorting Hat, arguably the first adult to address a new student, offers cryptic riddles rather than comfort. The sorting is public, deeply personal, and permanent. Children are asked to sit alone on a stool while a hat rifles through their private thoughts and makes a life-altering decision in front of the entire school. There is no consideration for indecision, no second chances, no appeal process. And once sorted, students are expected to embody the values of their house immediately. As the hat tells Harry, "You could be great, you know, it's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness, no doubt about that." Imagine telling that to a child who still sleeps with a nightlight. The very culture of Hogwarts encourages stoicism over vulnerability. When Hermione Granger is petrified in her second year, there is no mention of counselling services, no visible signs of grief processing among her classmates. Traumatizing events, like the attack on Colin Creevey or the Basilisk's rampage, are absorbed in silence. Students soldier on through potions and transfiguration as though nearly dying is just part of the curriculum. Even during the Triwizard Tournament, where the youngest competitor is 14, the school doesn't pause to reflect on the emotional toll. Instead, a magical binding contract drags Harry into mortal danger, and not one adult steps in to shield him from the burden. The House Cup system, with its obsession over points and competition, only deepens the emotional strain. Snape's blatant favoritism, McGonagall's stern detachment, and the pressure to perform create an environment where even kindness becomes transactional. Neville loses points for standing up to his friends. Hermione gains them for perfect spell work. Success is measured not by growth or compassion, but by how well a student fits the mold of their house. And all of this starts at age 11, with no allowance for emotional maturity or adjustment. One could argue that the system is designed not to teach magic, but to breed loyalty and obedience. There are moments when students break under this weight. In their 5th year, Harry, Ron, and Hermione found Dumbledore's army, an act of rebellion born from desperation. "We need to learn how to defend ourselves," Hermione says, not because the school is preparing them, but because it refuses to. Dolores Umbridge, sent by the Ministry, to enforce order becomes a symbol of how Hogwarts confuses discipline with pedagogy. Her methods are cruel but not fundamentally different from what students already endure. The difference is that she makes the cruelty obvious. The rest of the school cloaks it in tradition and mystery. The ghosts that roam the halls serve as a metaphor for the emotional neglect students face. Nearly headless Nick, the fat friar, and the Grey Lady linger in limbo, relics of the past. They offer stories, sometimes comfort, but never intervention. They are observers, not guides. Their presence is normalized like every other magical anomaly in the castle. But no one asks what it means for a child to live in a place surrounded by death. Moaning Myrtle, who haunts the girls' bathroom, was a student who died at school. Her spirit was never laid to rest, her trauma never resolved, and yet her ghost is treated as comic relief. In their third year, students are introduced to boggarts, magical creatures that take the form of their worst fear. It is a useful exercise in defense, but also a psychological experiment that could easily go wrong. When Neville's boggart becomes Professor Snape, the class laughs. But what is the long-term effect of a learning environment where a teacher is a child's worst fear? Lupin is the only instructor who adds humor to the lesson, encouraging students to transform their fears, but he is an exception, not the rule. And once he is gone, the teaching style reverts to one of pressure and peril. Age-specific adaptation is not just missing, it's actively rejected. In the fourth book, when Fleur Delacour and Victor Crumb visit Hogwarts as Triwizard champions, their presence reveals how other magical schools approach discipline and development. Beauxbaton students are graceful and poised. Durmstrang students are intense but focused. These institutions imply structure and coaching. Hogwarts, in contrast, throws its students into challenges that test their survival more than their scholarship. The maze in the final task is not just a competition, it's a psychological gauntlet. Harry faces illusions, isolation, and eventually death. And when Cedric dies, the grief is smothered under Dumbledore's vague warnings about Voldemort. There is no mourning period, there is only the next term. The professors, while brilliant, are not trained in child psychology. Snape's verbal abuse, Trelawney's erratic behavior, and Hagrid's recklessness would not be acceptable in any non-magical school. And yet no one monitors their performance. The same staff teaches students from 11 to 17 using the same tone, same discipline, same expectations. Minerva McGonagall tells Harry in his first year, transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn. At Hogwarts, anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. This is the first message Harry receives about learning magic: discipline over curiosity, fear over wonder. The library is restricted, the Forbidden Forest is off limits, secret passageways are unmarked, students are expected to navigate a castle full of hidden dangers with minimal adult guidance, and when rules are broken, often by necessity, the punishment is severe. Detention with Hagrid in the Forbidden Forest, detention with Umbridge and a blood quill, public humiliation in the Great Hall, but where is the scaffolding? Where is the understanding that young minds make mistakes, that rules must be taught, not just enforced? Harry, Ron, and Hermione survive not because the school protects them, but because they rely on each other. Their friendship becomes their emotional compass, their only stable structure. It is not the professors who mentor them in the ways of resilience, but the experiences they endure and the bond they build. When Dumbledore tells Harry, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities," he is acknowledging the moral journey each student faces. But he offers no tools for that journey, no safe space, no emotional vocabulary, no guidance beyond cryptic phrases and trusting the process. In truth, Hogwarts romanticizes adversity. It confuses trauma with growth, danger with education. There is no age-appropriate scaffolding, no recognition that children process fear, stress, and grief differently than adults. and in doing so it fails its youngest students, not out of malice, but out of tradition. The castle is ancient, the methods older still, and while its staircases move, its pedagogy stands still. 26. Why aren't students taught to protect themselves from manipulation? In the dim corridors of Hogwarts, where torches flicker on ancient stone walls and portraits whisper secrets from the past, there exists a quiet and unsettling gap in magical education. While students learn to turn hedgehogs into pincushions, grow tentacles from teacups, or duel with stunning spells, one fundamental domain of magical defense is left largely untouched: the protection of the mind and will. In a world filled with truth serums, mind reading, and spells of control, it seems almost negligent that the school does not prepare its students to defend against manipulation. The danger becomes stark when one considers how easily the mind can be invaded. Legilimency, the magical art of reading thoughts and emotions, is not a rare or ancient craft lost to time. It is actively used by powerful wizards like Severus Snape and Lord Voldemort. The books clearly describe how Snape could delve into the recesses of Harry's mind, and how Voldemort could plant visions and false emotions within him. Yet this form of magical intrusion is treated almost like an obscure art, reserved for spies or dark lords, rather than a real threat to everyday wizards. Occlumency, its only known defense, is not part of the standard Hogwarts curriculum. Harry is taught it only after becoming the specific target of Voldemort, and even then his lessons are erratic, painful, and ultimately ineffective. What's more troubling is that the one who taught him, Snape, never explains to Harry what occlumency truly is. There are no classroom discussions, no theoretical grounding, and certainly no practice in understanding when one is being manipulated or controlled. Imagine, for a moment, if Muggle schools sent children into the world without ever mentioning the concept of consent or coercion. That is effectively what Hogwarts does, leaving students to rely on instinct and luck to guard their inner selves. The unforgivable nature of the Imperious Curse is another chilling omission in their education. Barty Crouch Jr., posing as Mad-Eye Moody, demonstrates the Imperious Curse in front of the class and even uses it on students for educational purposes. While this scene offers some valuable exposure, it's an exception, not the rule. Under his twisted guidance, students like Neville and Dean experience the strange euphoria of forced compliance, but after that year, the topic seems to vanish. There's no structured training in resisting magical coercion. And yet, as we learn from Moody Crouch's lessons, resistance is possible. You can fight it, he tells them. But why doesn't the school formally teach how? It's not a philosophical question. In the political world of wizarding Britain, manipulation is power. Cornelius Fudge refuses to believe in Voldemort's return, not because he is evil, but because he fears the implications. His decisions affect the entire wizarding community, and yet he, like many others, is vulnerable to subtle influences. Consider the case of the Daily Prophet. Controlled by political pressure and fear, it spreads propaganda and misinformation, shaping the minds of the public. Hermione Granger recognizes this manipulation early, seeking alternate sources of truth, but nowhere in the school does she learn how to resist propaganda or critically evaluate magical information. That's all self-taught. Even in personal relationships, the dangers of manipulation abound. Love potions, for example, are treated more like harmless pranks than ethical violations. Romilda Vane attempts to give Harry a love potion, and it's played off as comic relief. Yet the implications are horrifying. These potions override consent and manufacture artificial emotions. In a non-magical world, we would call this abuse, but at Hogwarts there are no lessons on emotional manipulation, no discussion of magical boundaries, no guidance on resisting enchantments of affection or trust. Slughorn himself, a respected professor, keeps a vial of Felix Felicis, the liquid luck, which alters outcomes by enhancing charm and intuition. While not evil in itself, the potion demonstrates how magic can warp perception and decision-making. Those under its influence might act recklessly, believe they're invincible, or misinterpret situations. In the wrong hands, such effects can be used to steer others subtly. And yet, once again, students are not taught how to detect or defend against such influence. Is the line between persuasion and control so easily blurred that the curriculum dares not touch it? The case of Tom Riddle is perhaps the most glaring warning. As a student, Riddle mastered the art of manipulation, not through brute force, but through charisma, secrecy, and psychological pressure. He convinced Professor Slughorn to reveal a deeply dangerous secret about Horcruxes without needing to use a single spell. He manipulated Ginny Weasley into reopening the Chamber of Secrets, slowly feeding on her insecurities through the diary. This wasn't brute magic, it was mental invasion, one that no Hogwarts lesson prepared her for. Dumbledore, the wisest and most powerful wizard of his time, recognized these dangers but never systematized protection against them. He relied on Harry's strength of character, Hermione's intellect, and Ron's loyalty, rather than institutional safeguards. But character alone is not enough. Not every child has the self-awareness to resist lies, or the emotional intelligence to spot manipulation. Why are students not taught psychological resilience, magical consent, or the ethical use of enchantment? Where is the class that teaches them how to detect when they are being lied to, not just through veritaserum, but through charm, charisma, and fear? In Order of the Phoenix, we see how easily authority can be used as a weapon. Dolores Umbridge imposes totalitarian control over Hogwarts. Her rule is not maintained through dark magic, but through manipulation, threats, and silence. Students are punished for speaking truth. Books are censored. The very idea of resistance is painted as dangerous. While Harry leads Dumbledore's army to fight back, his lessons focus on offensive spells, not on withstanding psychological warfare. And yet mental resilience is what ultimately sustains them.